I know this is a very different video from me, I don't normally make videos like this, but I feel like it's important. I wanted to make a video like this for a long time because I feel like people can learn from my mistakes, because good video requires good sound. They say that 50% of video is audio, and those people are correct. You can have a video with so-so video quality, but if the audio's good, people will forgive that, because generally, if you have good audio, it's kind of like a trick. It makes the video almost look better because we almost perceive it with our ears to a certain extent. You can have great picture quality on the other hand, but if the audio is atrocious, people won't watch it. I, for many years, recorded a lot of videos using the camera's onboard microphone. Christopher Walken is renowned for not turning down any role he's offered. Dear Amanda Hagen, I somehow didn't manage to work this out despite the obvious clues. This was about a decade ago, and I have to say it was only fairly recently, as in 2018, did I start recording with external microphones. And you can go back to some of those older videos, and I do, and I wince at the fact that I wasn't recording them externally. People still watch those videos, and I get inundated with comments saying, "What did you record this on, a potato?" Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing in the slightest. And it really came to a head when I did that crossover with Dominic Noble on Stormbreaker, where again I recorded it with the onboard microphone, and then when he sent me his voiceover, I realised the huge discrepancy in the quality of the audio. What would happen if 007 was a teenager? Well, we find out the underwhelming results in Stormbreaker. And so that kind of put me on an odyssey. I got absolutely fixated with having good sound in my videos, and I bought loads and loads of different microphones for different applications, and I was probably overcompensating, and I feel like these days you can get good sound without having to spend a whole bunch of money, and I feel like for a lot of newcomer YouTubers, there's a lot of things you can learn from what I did. So, here's how to get good sound for not spending very much at all. In fact, just for a really snazzy title, let's say about 35 quid or so. First up, a disclaimer: I am not a professional audio engineer or an expert by any stretch of the imagination. This is only stuff that I have learnt from my own experience. That's why I said good sound, not great. I'm not implying this is suddenly going to give you professional quality sound, because it likely isn't. There is something true to the fact that the more money you spend on a microphone, the better sound you will get out of it. But I feel like throwing huge amounts of money at a problem doesn't necessarily solve it. Just because someone spends £400 on the latest Shure or Rode microphone, that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to use it. Good knowledge and good technique costs nothing, but it's worth learning. This is a video that is basically telling newcomers all the things that they really should know, but no one actually tells them. So why can't I just record with the onboard microphone? Allow me to demonstrate with this very old camcorder, which I used to shoot many of my old videos on, which will demonstrate why this is a very bad idea, because the microphone on these things is typically an afterthought. They're not really thinking about, professional use cases. They're thinking about capturing home movies and the like. It's meant to be serviceable at best, and as such, you're probably hearing my voice hitting against the limiter. It's doing things that make it sound really shrill and horrible. You're probably hearing a whole bunch of reverb from the room around me. It's just really awful. Of course, what I could have done is I could have plugged a microphone directly into the camcorder in the audio jack that's in the side of it that I didn't even know it had for years, but I didn't use it. So if you're looking for a camera, make sure it has an audio jack in it, and it will give you the opportunity to plug a microphone right into it and get that good audio directly onto your recording, which saves you a lot of faff in the edit. Another thing with onboard microphones is that typically if your lens refocuses, or if you're using the zoom function, you can actually hear the zoom in your recordings, because obviously the microphone is right against the internal mechanisms. Ryan Gosling once said, "Be better than the gap, be better than the internal microphone. That said, even if your camera does have an audio input, not all cameras are created equal, so do a little bit of research. Canon cameras notoriously have very poor preamps in them, which often add noise into the recordings. That's bad. There are some Panasonic cameras that don't turn down enough for some microphones. That's also bad. And also, this old Panasonic camcorder and many other Panasonic camcorders are quite poorly built in the fact that if you have them plugged into the wall, unfortunately, you can't have a plug-in powered microphone into the jack because otherwise you get all the AC wall noise going through your recordings. There is an easy solution to that. With a Panasonic camcorder, if it's plugged into the mains, you need to have one that has an external power supply, and I'll talk about ones that do in this video. Also, if you're using a camera, make sure you set your levels. There'll be a function that allows you to bring the audio down to an extent where the audio peaks are about minus 12 decibels, which gives you a bit of headroom in editing to raise it back up, and also, if you suddenly get really loud, it gives you a little bit of room to balance that out. Whereas if you haven't given yourself that headroom, it'll start clipping, and clipping sounds absolutely terrible. It's that really horrible distortion sound, and this is an example of what clipping sounds like. Once something is distorted, you can't fix that in editing. You can lower the volume, but it still sounds distorted. Typically, you want to just adjust it down almost as low as it can go without blocking out the sound entirely. So the first question you need to ask yourself is, what are you recording on? This is TRRS, which is for traditional cameras and camcorders, and this is TRRS, which is for mobile phones and computers and the like. And they're not cross-compatible with each other. You can't plug a TRRS one into a TRS jack like a camcorder because you won't get any sound. Luckily, in most cases, you'll usually get two cables for the individual purposes, or they'll throw in an adapter, and you can very cheaply buy adapters for them. The phone thing is complicated by the fact that a lot of phones don't have headphone jacks anymore, which is really inconvenient in a lot of ways because you have to plug them into the adapter for the headphones, which goes into your USB-C jack. Or you just buy a thing that has a USB jack on it. And this is me cutting in the future because, of course, I bought that USB-C lavalier microphone. This is the Simorr Wave L1, and actually, it works really well because I'm not using this with a phone. I've actually got this plugged into my laptop just out of frame, and it works very well as a USB microphone. It even comes with a USB-C to USB-A adapter for that very purpose. And actually, I've wanted a microphone like this for live streaming, just to really kind of just narrow things down. I don't have a big heavy microphone in shot, and this works really well and really effectively, I think. So this is more than just a USB-C microphone. It could actually work as something you could use in Zoom calls and the like, and that's pretty nifty. So it gets my vote. But let's say you have a camera that doesn't have an audio input in it, and there are plenty of them. There's no need to go out and buy a new one or anything ridiculous like that. There's no need to throw the baby out with the bathwater because there are plenty of solutions. One of them is that if you have a laptop or you have a computer nearby, what you can do is that you can have your USB microphone connected into your computer, and you can open a program like Audacity and sync up the recording in post. In fact, a lot of films actually record externally for various reasons. That's why you have clapperboards, because they do that, and that allows them to sync. Who knows? If you just have your USB microphone in shot, I hear that's a very popular style these days. It makes you very podcastery and professional, yeah. And a lot of USB microphones do actually sound pretty good, although, of course, results may vary. And this is a quick sample of what my USB microphone sounds like. This is the one that I record all my voiceovers on. This is a BC Master, just a generic USB microphone. I think I got it for about 30 quid or so. So this gives you a general idea of what it sounds like, and I'm quite impressed with the sound of this microphone for the price considering. Another solution would be this, the old-fashioned dictaphone or sound recorder, friend to journalists everywhere. everywhere. Yes, you can look like a real professional carrying one of these around. Just make sure you pick one that has a USB jack on the side of it so you can take the recordings off like you would any old standard hard drive. Yes, people will talk about zooms and Tascams and the like. This will do a very similar job, and it's not as expensive. It's very common to find. In fact, this is a used one. This is 10 years old and it still works. All I did is that I put lithium batteries in the back of it. And I do like things where you can actually replace the batteries. I hate things with built-in lithium batteries because I know that that's built-in obsolescence. Whereas something like this, it may be old, but it's still usable. And even if you do have an audio jack, it's worth picking up one of these things because it makes it very flexible. Because what you can do is you can plug a microphone right into the top of this and you can put it in a pocket somewhere. So you can clip on a lavalier microphone onto your jacket, or maybe you've got one of those handheld reporter microphones. Really complete the look that way. And all you have to do is turn it on, hit the record button, put it into hold mode, slip it in a pocket, clap for sync, and then wander around, do your recording, and then, once you're done, take it out of hold mode, hit the stop button, take the file off, and sync it in your editor. Now I'm just recording myself with my camera on a bench here, but you're not actually hearing the audio from the camera. What you're hearing is this lavalier that's clipped onto my jacket. Apologies for any wind noise, and there's some cars on the hill down below me. Why would you do this? Well, generally it allows you to walk and talk like this, and I'm deliberately walking with my back to the camera like a complete bozo because most wireless mic systems cut out in this very situation. But say for example you had your friend recording you and you wanted to run around and do all sorts of crazy things like this. Well, you can do this. You can walk all the way back here. The point is, by having a recorder in your pocket, that means that you're no longer tethered to the camera, which means that you are completely free. You're free. You're free to do whatever you want. Oh, I'm an idiot. But maybe you don't even need a dictaphone because you know what everyone has? A phone. And you can download a sound recorder app if you don't have one already. This is Dolby On, for example, but there's also the Rode Reporter app, and basically you can just plug your microphone in there, record it on that, and of course take the files off your phone and sync them from that. Bish, bash, bosh. So you must be asking yourself, well, what are you recording yourself on right now? This, right outside of frame, is the Takstar SGC 600. You might have heard of its older brother, the 598, which I used to record my videos on. And this is still a really good microphone. This achieved somewhat legendary status back in the day because it actually was quite comparable to Rode microphones, even though it cost in the region of about $25 or quid. The 600 has considerable improvements over the older 598, not just in that it's smaller, it also records less low-level noise, which is very obvious in quiet surroundings. It's got a louder output in general, which means you can turn those preamps down in your camera, but also the sound profile itself is a lot more balanced. This doesn't have a lot of low end in it, so what I'd have to do is I'd have to do an EQ pass, an equalization, and really boost those low frequencies. Thanks to Dan Olsen for giving me a curve for the 598. I'm going to throw that on screen for people that want to copy what I did with my post-processing. So this is what the 598 sounds like, the old version of the microphone. What you can probably hear right now is that it is generating a lot of low-level noise and hiss, but you can of course take that out in editing, and it doesn't have a lot of low-end punch, which of course you can boost in post-production, but generally those were the two major deficiencies of this microphone. This is still a really good buy for the price, but I feel like the 600 is where it's really at these days. The two microphones are very similar in that they both run off a single AA battery. In fact, they run so well that I have hardly had to replace the battery in the entire time that I've even owned the 598. That is how little power these things actually draw. You've also got a low cut switch, which I really wouldn't use. You just apply that in post. There's a 10 decibel increase in volume switch, which I actually apply to the Takstar because it's quite low volume to begin with, whereas on the 600, because it's so much louder, I actually leave it set at 0. The 600 also has a -10, which is useful for some cameras which can't turn themselves down enough to make sure you don't get clipping. And obviously it has an on-off switch, which can be quite useful. Just make sure that you remember to turn the microphone on, and remember to turn it off again. And you would think that's a fairly simple thing to do. No, I've accidentally left things on before, and that will really drain your battery quite quickly. One thing they didn't really improve on the 600 is the shock mount isn't great. It's kind of plasticky and built in, and so it doesn't really actually reduce all that much shock, so you can't really go out vlogging with it. That's why I tend to use this as a studio microphone mounted above me in this fairly quiet surrounding. What you should do is follow my example, especially if you're only an arm's length away from the camera like I am, in that you can buy a little friction magic arm, and then you can mount your microphone on top of the magic arm, slip it into your camera's cold shoe. You've got a pseudo boom mic. But the idea is to bring the mic as close to you as possible, because that will improve the sound. And you would think the difference between having it mounted on the camera's hot shoe and actually having it mounted slightly further forward wouldn't be that much of an improvement, but trust me, it is. Especially when it comes to cutting down reverb and room noise. I feel like that actually does a really good job of doing that, so that is a good hack to try. Now you must be asking, if I'm leaving that one at home, well, what do I record myself on the go with? Well, you get one of these. This is a Rode Videomicro knockoff, and there are loads of these under various different guises on the market. These are often called mini shotgun microphones. They're more like pencil microphones, but even so, look at how small that form factor is and how discreet it is. In fact, this can be your studio microphone. You don't even need to bother with that. You can just get this and have it apply to nearly all situations, and that's very useful. Admittedly, the Rode Videomicro itself actually falls outside of this price bracket, and it's actually not very competitive these days because you don't get the mobile phone cable in the box, and typically you don't get a lot of extras, where a lot of the clones actually have all the stuff that you would need for it. Like, you get both TRRS and TRRS connectors, you get foam windshields, furry windshields, very important if you're taking this outside. You need the big furry windshield. I know it looks embarrassing, but it does work at cutting down all that wind noise. This is the Comica CVM10, which apparently is very close in sound to the Rode Videomicro. So this is what it sounds like if you're walking around doing vlogging outside. I don't really do a lot of that because, frankly, walking around with a camera in public holding is a little bit weird, to be honest. Theoretically, if you did want to wander around and talk to a camera, it would sound exactly like this. I've actually got the wind muff on it to make sure the breeze carrying through the air doesn't actually affect the audio too much. It appears to be doing its job fairly well, and there's the wind. It's really picking up right now. You can probably see that in the trees. Yeah. But hopefully, if it's doing its job properly, you can still hear me perfectly fine. If not, it probably sounds absolutely terrible. Admittedly, because there are so many different clones, there are ones that have differing issues. A lot of them have very hard shock mounts, which defeats the purpose of a shock mount. If you don't have a good shock mount, if you're wandering around and vlogging, you'll start faintly hearing a thum, thum, thum. And you'll be like, what's that thudding sound in my recording? Oh, it's all the shocks going into my microphone ruining the sound. So this one actually has a fairly floppy kind of mount, which allows it to kind of dissipate that. And I don't really hear it in a lot of the recordings. Admittedly, these don't have a lot of bass anyway. That's where they cut down on that shock as well. Another handy thing about these microphones is they don't require any batteries. They literally take their power from the camera. So you literally just plug them in and they work, and you don't need to think about turning them on and off, which is really handy. unless you've got a Panasonic camcorder, in which case, probably not the best to use in all scenarios. I do have a couple of caveats with the CVM10. The first is that the two cables that come with it are not great. I would not even use the TRRS one because it has so much noise in the recording. I would actually just use the TRRS cable and use a TRRS adapter into my phone and cut down on all of that. But the TRRS also has a fairly serious problem in that it's not fully shielded, which means that if your camera is connected up to the mains via a wall, you're going to hear the electricity in your recordings as a very low level hum. And in some cases you can get rid of that. It's only very faint on these cables, but it's still unmistakably there. So I just keep this as something that I use on the go when I'm not actually connected up to the wall. Now this is the Deity D4 Mini, and you must be asking yourself, why are you holding this? This is a 50 quid microphone. That's out of the price range. It is, but it's a clone of the Rode Videomicro that has a very important thing. It has a little audio input, and that was the reason why I bought this specifically, is because I thought it had so many functions. And there is a clone of this microphone now. Smallrig has come out with the Forevala S20, which also has an audio input on the jack of it, so you can put an extra microphone going into your microphone. In the Deity, it records on the right channel, and so you have the audio from the mic coming in on the left side, and then you've got, say, a lavalier microphone on the right, which means that you have two different sound sources, and that means you've got redundancy. I'm gonna put this to the test here, so hopefully you're hearing me a little bit differently here than you are on the left ear. And admittedly, that's a bit of a weird, freaky effect, but in editing, of course, I can separate out those channels so I can pick the one that I want, and it basically means that I've got, you know, a nice degree of insurance here, so that's always good. That means that if something goes wrong with, say, your lav mic, you've got the audio from this. Or you could, if you wanted to, mix the sort of more ambient sound recorded by this with the sound from the lavalier. There are so many different possibilities you can do in editing, and the Forevala, which I'm not holding in my hand right now, also has that feature, and it beats the Deity because it throws in a lavalier for you to plug into as well. So literally, that is an all-in-one purchase right there. You've got a shotgun mic, and you've got a lavalier microphone, all in the same package. That's absolutely fantastic value. The Forevala actually is different from the Deity because it actually has a switch on the top of it that goes from mono to stereo. So if you didn't really want to faff around in editing and just wanted to mix the two sources together, you can do that by just switching it to mono. I don't know why you would do that, honestly. Flick it to stereo and you've got two separate channels that you can play around with. That is extremely useful, and I think that is a really good value purchase. I mean the Smallrig thing. But don't feel bad if your microphone doesn't have the ability to record two things at the same time, because you can just buy this cable. This is a Hosa stereo breakout cable. You can get this for about 10 quid or so. It's absolutely fantastic. It does exactly the same thing. You can plug one microphone into this one microphone into this one, plug it into your camera, and then it'll use the stereo in the camera to record two separate sources on the left and right channel, and then in editing you can mix them together into the center channel. Make sure you do that whilst you're editing. You don't want something that's only in the left or right channel. That sounds particularly egregious. This is fantastic because it means, again, that you've got a redundancy. It means that you can plug, say, a lavalier into one and a shotgun into that, and that means you've got two separate sources. And if you're trying to do something where sound is paramount and you've only got one take of it, you need as many redundancies as possible to make sure that you don't screw up. And things like these should be essential in your kit, especially if you're traveling. Which brings us on to lavalier microphones, and you might have noticed that I sound different because I'm not using the shotgun mic, I'm using the lavalier. Now these are really small omnidirectional, so they pick up sound everywhere. They're not like shotgun microphones that are very front focused, but because they're so small, that's typically not too much of an issue. And you see these a lot in interview settings. They're really useful, particularly in rooms that are not great. Because the sound source is so close, it can help compensate for a lot of issues. However, that does mean that they can sometimes sound somewhat unnatural in certain circumstances. The one that I'm using right now is a very common one, the Boya BY-M1. Loads of people use these. This is something that has been tried and tested. It comes with a 6-meter cable. It's a really long cable, and in some circumstances that's very useful, particularly if the camera's really far away. But also, it's a 6-meter long cable. I've got a little crude tie on my tripod, just knotted together wire. It's way more than I really need to use in most circumstances. It makes it a pain to put away in its carry case. It's a real trip hazard in certain circumstances as well. It comes with a TRRS cable, but it actually works in both cameras and phones, because halfway down it has a little switch between cameras and mobile phones. It's basically an on-off switch, where for phones you don't need to turn it on, it literally works by itself, but for cameras it runs off of a little watch battery that screws into that, and that watch battery is also quite fiddly. I would suggest using a bit of tape to get that out if you need to. Now, if you're using this with a camera, again, you're going to need to remember to turn this on and off, but otherwise I found this to be fairly reliable. I have had a couple of little issues where my voice actually has clipped out in the recordings and has made it totally unusable, and that's quite a bad thing, but that's only happened a handful of times maybe, and I think that's just purely because of my vocal pattern. They have actually released a new version of this microphone called the BY-M1 Pro, and the differences between the two, there is a headphone jack now in that little remote connector, and that's not for live monitoring, that's to plug headphones in if you're using this with a mobile phone. But the big difference between the two versions of the microphone is that the non-Pro has a more bassy response to it, whereas the Pro version is a lot more neutral, and I actually prefer that in a lot of ways. I feel like the bass boost in this is a little bit artificial. It makes things sound a little bit muddy. On some voices, that could work out quite well. Some voices are quite low and quite bassy. But if your voice is quite high, that's going to sound a little bit weird with something that accentuates the lows like that. The Boya BY-M1 is also available in a dual-headed version, and that is actually quite useful for interview scenarios. Now, there is a catch with that. It doesn't record the two lavaliers as separate audio tracks. Instead, it mixes them into a single mono signal, which means you can't separate them out in editing. However, it does have its uses. I recorded my podcast episode with me, Ashens, and Oliver Harper using that Hosa Tech connector. So I had my single lavalier on the left channel and Stuart and Oliver on the right channel, which meant I had 3 audio sources going into the same camera. And that is pretty neat. And if you had 2 of those, you could record 4 people into the same camera, and you have 2 of them on one side and 2 of them on the other. That's fairly ingenious. Now, I've actually changed microphones again. This is a generic Chinese TRRS lavalier microphone. You can find them under a whole bunch of different names. I've got this under something called AGP Tech, and usually they're for mobile phones, hence they're TRRS, but they come with the TRRS adapter to use in a camera, and I think they sound really great, especially because you can pick them up for peanuts. In mobile phones, they do have a tendency to clip depending on your model. So this is me using the lavalier into my phone, and I'm trying to keep my voice down because even though it's pinned halfway up my shirt, because I have no control over the gain on my phone, that means that if I talk a little bit too loudly, it turns into absolutely clipping central. But in a camera, if you turn your preamp all the way down, it sounds absolutely fantastic. I think it has a more natural sound profile than the Boya, and usually they come with a whole bunch of accessories. Like, there's loads of stuff that comes with this, and it's got a much shorter cable than the Boya, which means that it's much easier to carry around with you. And I would actually suggest that you do, actually. If you're a person that vlogs, this is a really great thing to just have in your pocket, just to carry with you at a moment's notice. So this is me jumping in from the future to say that actually I did find a little bit of a bug with these generic Chinese ones, in that if you put them into a splitter like this or the Deity D4, they tend to come out really hot and distorted for some reason that I can't really account for. I don't understand why. So I end up buying another lavalier microphone. This is the Simorr Wave L1. This is a TRRS lavalier microphone. Of course, it comes with a TRRS adapter, and that's plugged directly into my camera, and that's what you're hearing right now. And I think it sounds really good. It maybe sounds a little bit sibilant, but otherwise it sounds very decent. I've also tried it in my phone, and it doesn't seem to have quite as hot a signal as the generic Chinese one, so it might be worth checking out as an alternative. They're also just very nicely presented. The ends of the jack actually have branding on them. Really fancy pants. Actually, you know what's really plush is the bag that they come in, which is a little bit oversized for what's actually in it, but even so, it is the softest thing. I just really like the tactileness of it. Ooh. If you're going to use your lavalier microphones outside, I would definitely advise that you get a pack of these. These are Furry Windshields to put on lavalier microphones. This, in fact, is one that I highly recommend. The Comica CVM MF1. That's right, the Mother Fluffers one. And these are really great because what they do is that they have a pull string on them that attach around the microphone, really close it off from the outside, but allow your voice to pass through, and that means that you can wander around and you don't pick up any wind noise whatsoever. It sounds fantastic. Yes, it's a furry windshield, so obviously it's not inconspicuous, and they're fairly big for what they are, but they work really well. So I don't care about the fact that I look like I'm wearing a gerbil on my jacket. But maybe you like to do vlogging on your phone. Maybe that's your thing. Well, I actually have something that might be of use to you. This is the Boya BY-M110. This is a cute little omnidirectional microphone that just goes right into the headphone jack, and look at that for a little vlogging setup. It's really inconspicuous. You don't even need anything else with it. You can literally just hold it in your hand like that. Like, look how small and discreet this setup is. So often you need to have this whole like little stand and setup which makes you look kind of conspicuous. This just kind of fits in perfectly. So this is an indoor test of the Boya BY-M110, which obviously this is not a perfect test for this kind of omnidirectional microphone because it's probably picking up all the room reflections around me, hence why I say this is more an outdoor microphone. That is where it truly shines. This is the Boya BY-M110 outside, and obviously it sounds a lot better now because there's a lot less reflective stuff for my voice to bounce off of. Now, it's only got a foam windshield, not a furry one, but even so, it's an omnidirectional microphone, so it's not that sensitive to wind, but even so, I wouldn't bring this out in a gale, but hopefully my voice sounds good even outside, and this is a really tiny, compact setup. If you are recording yourself with your phone, unfortunately, you probably won't be able to use your native camera app because a lot of them don't really accept external microphones, but luckily that can usually be solved with a third-party app. Like, I use Open Camera and that accepts external microphones, and if I'm recording a vlog on my phone, which I might need to if I ever go out in the next several years, this is what I'll be using to record something on the go. It's just nice to have something that you can carry in your pocket just to have when you need it. Now, of course, a way that you can make any mic sound better is through editing, and a lot of the samples in this video have been edited. So I'm going to show you now the process that I use to try and post-process my audio. I've got my editor here open, Magix Vegas. Of course, your one might vary. Magix Vegas definitely has some audio tools in it, but I actually use a third-party one. I actually use Audacity to edit my audio. So here we are start in Magix Vegas. Here is a clip from earlier in the video. This is just the raw audio, as you can see on the timeline. The first thing that I do is I right click the track here and I select open copy in audio editor, which of course I've specified as Audacity. So now Audacity's opening up, and that creates a separate WAV file right next to where that file is saved that I can edit. Now the first thing we're going to do is a noise reduction pass, because I record this in a very quiet room, so there shouldn't be any other noises, but all microphones produce a little bit of low level hum. So I'm just going to go to a bit at the end here where I'm not speaking, and I'm just going to select that portion of the video. You can see on the meters there, it's very low level. That's just generated by the microphone. It's not room tone or noise or anything like that. It's just purely from the microphone. And of course you can get rid of things like room hum using this tool. Now I go to effects, noise reduction. Here are my noise reduction settings. I'll just keep those on screen for a moment in case you want to copy them. You don't have to copy everything that I do, but I'm just throwing it up as a guide basically. Then you click get noise profile, and then what you do is that you select the entire track, go to effects, and then repeat noise reduction, and then that will take out that particular noise from the track. And now you can see it's ever so slightly different, but in those actual quiet portions it's completely silent. Now there are instances where you don't do that. If you're outside, I wouldn't necessarily do a noise reduction pass, because honestly it gives you some pretty weird side effects, and honestly when you're outside, having it sound like you're in a sound booth sounds really distracting and unnatural. Now this is the part here where I would normally do an EQ pass if I needed to. I don't need to for this microphone, but in Audacity it's separated into filter curve and graphic EQ. I use the filter curve. It used to be in previous versions of Audacity, it was just an equalization. I don't know why they've separated it like that, other than just being needlessly confusing. But this is where I would put the boost for the 598 usually, but for most of my microphones I don't EQ them like that. Instead I move on to the compressor, and here are my compressor settings on screen if you want to follow them. I would tweak them depending on your use case. My settings might not exactly match your settings if you need them. So I'm applying the effect now, and you can see that it's got a lot quieter on the track, but what a compressor does is that it makes the quieter parts louder and the louder parts quieter. It smashes them together. You'll notice that my track beforehand had very uneven levels, so this basically evens out the track essentially. In fact, what I normally do is apply a second compressor just in case I've missed anything, just to really make sure the track is very balanced and very leveled. So I'm applying that now. Okay, so that's really balanced out now, but of course we need to raise the volume of that track. So now we go to effects, amplify, and now what I normally do is raise it up to -4, and that's about the level you want your audio to be. There is something called -23 LUFS, which is the International Broadcast Standard for loudness, and this is what YouTube actually uses. If you go to Stats for Nerds, when you right click a video, what you'll see is how much the video is actually playing at, and also how far the video is off that standard. If it's above 100%, what YouTube does is actually lower the volume as a safety feature. So you don't want to exceed that, but you want to try and aim for that, because obviously if you're a bit too quiet, that generally puts people off a little bit. So the track is mostly where we want it to be at this point, but there are little spikes here that are kind of throwing off the overall loudness. So I'm just going to go into those and just manually select them and bring them down by about -2 decibels, and then raise the rest of the track back up to compensate to -4. So I do this a couple of times just to make sure the track is a nice, balanced, comfortable listening experience. It doesn't feel like it's fluctuating all the time, and it really brings out the best in my voice. Of course, now we have to overwrite this audio copy, so we go to File, Export as, WAV file, then we find where that copy was saved, save it under the same file name, and replace it. Wait for Audacity to do that, and go back to Vegas. Vegas recognizes the file is different and rescans it, and you'll notice that the waveform has now changed to our new version. And there we go, we have the edited audio track, and I do this for each of the clips that I'm in. These editing tricks are hopefully something that will get you started. You might need to learn a few things along the way to suit what is best for you, but generally this is how I post-process my audio. So there you have it, some affordable things to improve your audio. I hope this has been been helpful, and I hope I haven't bored you too much. And I know this sounds a little bit complicated and overwhelming at first, but trust me, it will become second nature. And as a creator, you've always got to strive to be improving and learning new things. That's what I've discovered over the years. I've got to keep learning this stuff to try and make things even better. Self-improvement is something that you need to put effort into, and I think that it's something that people will really start to notice in your work. Hope this is helpful, and I look forward to seeing the videos that you make with all this great audio. Until then, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.